She's 32 and just posted a meme that got tens of thousands of likes. The message is clear. If you're dating a woman in her 30s and you're not serious about moving things fast, then don't waste her time. The comments are flooded with support from other women who completely agree with this perspective. But here's what the same meme reveals about her actual expectations. She wants to get married, start a family, launch a successful business, fix her mental health, lose 20 pounds, and travel the world. And she wants all of this to happen within the next 6 months. Not 6 years, not even 18 months, 6 months. The comment section is full of women cheering this on, calling it knowing your worth and not settling for less. But what they're really celebrating is a mindset that virtually guarantees failure in every single area they claim to prioritise. Today, I'm going to expose why this attitude represents one of the biggest reasons women, especially women in their 30s, are failing spectacularly in the dating market while blaming everyone except themselves for the predictable disasters that follow unrealistic expectations and impossible timelines. Let's break down what these women are actually demanding and why each expectation reveals a complete disconnection from reality that would be laughable if it weren't so widespread and destructive. Getting married within 6 months means going from complete strangers to lifetime commitment faster than most people take to decide on a car purchase. Both parties are still in the infatuation period, where brain chemistry creates temporary insanity that makes terrible decisions feel like destiny, and red flags feel like romantic excitement. Starting a family in 6 months ignores basic human biology. Even if conception happened immediately, human pregnancy lasts 9 months, making starting a family in 6 months a physical impossibility unless adoption is involved, which requires even longer legal processes and evaluations. Launching a successful business in 6 months shows complete ignorance about how business actually works. Filing paperwork takes a month, but building a profitable, sustainable business typically takes years of consistent effort, market development, and iterative learning from inevitable early failures. Getting mental health in order within 6 months after 3.5 decades of ineffective coping mechanisms demonstrates magical thinking about psychological change. Real mental health improvement requires identifying patterns, developing new skills, practicing healthier responses, and allowing time for genuine neurological changes to stabilise. Losing 20 pounds sustainably in 6 months while simultaneously managing marriage stress, family planning, business building, and mental health work represents a fundamental misunderstanding of how sustainable weight loss works and the resources required for lasting behavioural change. The timeline fantasy reveals women who want adult life achievements without accepting adult timescales for achieving them. They want the results of years of consistent effort delivered immediately because they've decided they're ready now. The most destructive aspect of this mindset isn't just the unrealistic individual timelines, it's the demand to achieve all these major life changes simultaneously. This approach virtually guarantees failure across all domains while creating maximum stress and minimum sustainable progress. Each of these goals requires significant mental, emotional, and time resources that cannot be split effectively without compromising success in all areas. Building a marriage requires emotional availability and attention that conflicts with the focus needed for business building. Mental health work requires processing time and energy that competes with weight loss motivation and relationship investment. The multitasking approach treats major life domains like simple tasks that can be checked off a list, rather than complex, interconnected systems that require sustained attention and resource allocation to develop properly. Women attempting this approach typically achieve surface-level progress in multiple areas, while making substantial progress in none, creating the appearance of productivity while generating underlying frustration from lack of meaningful accomplishment in any single domain. The failure factory operates by distributing limited resources across too many competing priorities, ensuring inadequate investment in any single area, while maximizing stress from trying to manage multiple demanding projects simultaneously. This approach also prevents the deep focus required for mastering complex skills, building meaningful relationships, or creating sustainable changes that require concentrated attention over extended periods. Most importantly, the multitasking failure factory teaches women that their lack of success stems from external obstacles rather than resource allocation decisions, preventing them from learning better strategies for sequential achievement and sustainable progress. Real success in any meaningful domain requires giving yourself enough time to succeed, which means accepting that worthwhile achievements take longer than impatience wants to allow, and that rushing typically produces inferior results that don't last. This principle operates through understanding that most valuable life achievements require learning curves, skill development periods, relationship building phases, and iterative improvement cycles that cannot be compressed without sacrificing quality and sustainability. Marriage requires time to properly evaluate compatibility, work through conflicts, understand each other's patterns under stress, and build trust through consistent behavior across different situations and challenges. Rushing this process typically results in marriages based on incomplete information and fantasy projections rather than realistic assessment. Business success requires market learning, customer development, product improvement, systems building, and financial management skills that develop through experience and time rather than through intention and effort alone. Most successful businesses take years to become profitable and sustainable. Mental health improvement requires identifying unconscious patterns, developing awareness of triggers, practicing new responses, and allowing neurological changes to stabilize through repetition over months or years rather than weeks or months. Physical health changes require developing sustainable habits, allowing metabolic adaptation, building consistent routines, and creating lifestyle changes that can be maintained long-term rather than short-term results that cannot be sustained without constant willpower and restriction. The enough time principle recognizes that impatience is often the primary cause of failure in important life domains, not lack of capability or external obstacles, making timeline adjustment a crucial skill for achieving meaningful life goals. Women in their 30s often feel behind schedule compared to cultural timelines or peer achievements, creating urgency that makes bad decisions feel necessary and reasonable approaches feel too slow to be acceptable. This reality trap operates through comparison with ideal timelines that assume optimal decision-making from age 18, perfect circumstances, and no learning curves or setbacks that characterize normal adult development for most people. The trap includes feeling that starting career development, relationship building, or personal growth work at 30 represents being behind, rather than recognizing that starting at any age requires the same time investment for skill development and competence building. Nobody gets credit for abbreviated timelines or passes on necessary experience simply to accommodate late starts. Career development takes approximately 10 years regardless of whether you start at 18 or 28 or 38. Relationship vetting requires several years of observation under different circumstances regardless of starting age. The late start trap convinces women that their urgency justifies rushing processes that cannot be rushed without consequences, making them more likely to make poor choices in partners, careers, and personal development because slow progress feels unacceptable. This creates cycles where late start anxiety leads to rushing. Rushing leads to poor outcomes. Poor outcomes create more lost time, and more lost time increases late start anxiety that drives more rushing and more poor decisions. The reality trap prevents women from accepting that starting later requires the same time investment as starting earlier, but starting is still better than continuing to delay while waiting for perfect circumstances or abbreviated timelines. Impatience creates an attitude that demands immediate results or immediate dismissal of opportunities, virtually guaranteeing cycling through failures while never allowing sufficient time for any single approach to develop into meaningful success. The guaranteed failure system operates through shortened attention spans for important goals that require sustained effort over months or years to produce measurable results and sustainable changes. This system manifests in dating through rapid partner turnover when relationships don't progress immediately to desired outcomes, preventing the time necessary for proper compatibility evaluation and relationship development that could lead to successful long-term partnerships. Impatience also affects career and business development through abandoning strategies before they have time to produce results, switching approaches frequently rather than allowing single approaches to mature, and expecting immediate return on investment in areas that typically require extended development periods. The system includes entitled attitudes that expect life circumstances to accommodate abbreviated timelines rather than adjusting expectations to realistic timelines based on the complexity of desired outcomes. Impatience-driven decision-making prioritizes short-term emotional satisfaction over long-term strategic positioning. making women more likely to choose immediate gratification over delayed but more substantial benefits. The guaranteed failure system creates patterns where women blame external circumstances for lack of success, while continuing to apply the same impatient approach that predictably produces inadequate results across multiple life domains. If you're starting to recognize how unrealistic expectations and impossible timelines might be sabotaging your success in relationships and other life areas, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. The patterns I'm revealing operate below conscious awareness, but understanding them could transform how you approach goal achievement and relationship building. A successful life requires managing multiple important domains simultaneously, but effective management means sustainable progress rather than revolutionary change across all areas at once. The plate-spinning reality includes major life domains like health and fitness, relationships and family, career and finances, personal growth and creativity, and social connections and community involvement. Each domain requires significant time and attention to maintain, let alone improve substantially. Successful adults typically achieve sustainable situations where most life domains are functioning adequately, while focusing intensive improvement efforts on one or two areas at a time rather than attempting simultaneous revolution across all domains. Each life domain represents substantial weight in terms of time, energy, and attention requirements. Getting any single domain truly thriving requires concentrated focus and resource allocation that necessarily reduces available resources for other domains during improvement periods. The reality of plate spinning means that attempting to dramatically improve all domains simultaneously typically results in an inadequate resource allocation to any single domain, preventing meaningful progress while creating maximum stress and frustration. Sustainable success requires accepting that life domain improvement happens sequentially rather than simultaneously, with periods of intense focus on specific areas while maintaining rather than improving other areas. The plate-spinning reality also means that major life changes in one domain typically require reducing focus on other domains temporarily, making simultaneous achievement of multiple major goals unrealistic for most people with normal resource limitations. Real achievement requires focusing intensively on one major life domain until it reaches sustainable stability before shifting primary attention to the next domain that needs development or improvement. The sequential framework operates through concentrated resource allocation that allows sufficient time and attention for meaningful skill development, habit formation, and sustainable progress in individual life areas. This approach might mean dedicating several years primarily to career development, while maintaining but not dramatically improving health, relationships, or personal development areas, or focusing intensively on relationship building while maintaining career stability without pursuing aggressive advancement. Sequential success recognizes that divided attention produces divided results, while concentrated attention allows for breakthrough progress that becomes self-sustaining and frees up resources for focusing on the next priority area. The framework includes accepting that you cannot have everything immediately, but can have everything eventually if you're willing to pursue goals in sustainable sequences rather than overwhelming parallel processes. Sequential approach also allows for proper skill development and competence building in each domain before moving to the next area, creating solid foundations rather than surface-level improvements that don't last under pressure. The strategy framework requires prioritizing goals based on importance and urgency rather than attempting to achieve all goals simultaneously, regardless of resource limitations and timeline realities. While it may eventually be possible to have success across multiple life domains, the idea that you can achieve all major life goals simultaneously represents magical thinking that ignores resource limitations and development timelines. The timeline myth operates through cultural messaging that suggests successful people achieve everything at once, rather than recognizing that most successful people built different life areas sequentially over extended periods. This myth particularly affects women who see social media snapshots of other women who appear to have perfect relationships, successful careers, excellent health, and fulfilling personal lives without recognizing the years of sequential development and current maintenance requirements. The myth also ignores that having it all requires making decisions about sequencing and prioritization, rather than attempting to achieve everything immediately when readiness and resources finally align. Timeline mythology prevents realistic planning and creates disappointment when simultaneous achievement proves impossible, leading to abandoning goals rather than adjusting approaches to sustainable sequential development. The have-it-all myth also creates comparison pressure where women judge their progress against impossible standards rather than realistic timelines for sequential achievement and sustainable progress. Most importantly, the myth prevents understanding that sequencing decisions are strategic choices rather than failures, and that prioritizing most important goals first increases likelihood of eventually achieving secondary goals rather than decreasing it. Women in their 30s who adopt unrealistic timeline expectations and entitlement attitudes often fail in dating markets because their approach repels the high-quality men they claim to want while attracting men who don't meet their standards. The failure analysis reveals that impatience created by late-start anxiety makes women less attractive to successful men who understand that building meaningful relationships requires time investment and compatibility evaluation that cannot be rushed without consequences. High-quality men with relationship experience recognize entitled attitudes and unrealistic expectations as red flags that predict future relationship problems, making them more likely to avoid women who demand immediate commitment and life progression regardless of actual compatibility. The analysis shows that impatience restricts the amount of time women allocate to individual relationship development while motivating them to pursue multiple relationships simultaneously, preventing the focused attention that successful relationship building requires. Entitled attitudes that demand life, accommodate abbreviated timelines, create adversarial relationship dynamics where men feel pressured to provide commitment, resources, and life changes on timelines that serve women's urgency rather than mutual relationship development. The sexual marketplace failure also includes women becoming less selective about partner quality due to timeline pressure, leading to relationships with men who are available quickly rather than men who are suitable for long-term partnership but require proper vetting time. This creates cycles where timeline pressure leads to poor partner choices, poor relationships create lost time increases timeline pressure, and increased pressure leads to even worse partner selection and relationship outcomes. The fertility timeline adds real urgency to women's 30s that makes unrealistic expectations feel rational and necessary. But this pressure often leads to decisions that work against, rather than towards successful family formation. The pressure cooker operates through legitimate biological concerns about declining fertility that make every month feel precious and every relationship delay feel costly. Women feel the need to accelerate relationship timelines because biological reality doesn't accommodate extended courtship periods like it did in their 20s. However, the pressure cooker effect often produces exactly the opposite of what women need for successful family formation. Rushing relationship evaluation increases the likelihood of choosing inappropriate partners for parenting and long-term partnership, making family formation less likely rather than more likely. Fertility anxiety also creates desperation that men can sense, and that makes women less attractive as potential partners. The pressure to find someone quickly transforms dating from mutual evaluation into urgent shopping, changing the entire dynamic from attraction-based to need-based. The biological timeline pressure makes women more likely to stay in mediocre relationships longer than they should because starting over feels too costly in terms of time, while simultaneously making them more likely to push for commitment before proper compatibility assessment is complete. This pressure also affects decision-making about career and personal development, creating conflicts between investing in long-term growth and focusing on immediate family formation that often results in suboptimal choices in both domains. The pressure cooker demonstrates why sequential goal achievement becomes even more important in 30s. The urgency makes it tempting to rush everything simultaneously, but rushing typically produces worse outcomes in the domain that matters most. Social media and peer comparison create false timelines and unrealistic standards that make women feel behind schedule, even when their actual progress is normal and healthy for their circumstances and choices. The comparison trap operates through curated social media presentations that show other women's highlight reels while hiding the struggles, setbacks, and sequential development that actually characterize most people's life progression. Women see peers who appear to have everything together: marriages, children, successful careers, perfect bodies, without recognizing that these achievements typically developed over many years and often required sacrifices in other areas that aren't visible in social media presentations. The matrix also includes cultural messaging about what women should have achieved by certain ages that doesn't account for individual circumstances, different starting points, or the reality that life rarely follows ideal timelines, regardless of planning and effort. Comparison pressure makes women feel like they're failing when they're actually making normal progress, and this false failure perception creates urgency that leads to poor decision-making and unrealistic timeline expectations. The trap extends to relationship comparisons where women judge their dating progress against friends' relationship timelines without understanding the different circumstances, compromise levels, or hidden problems that may exist in those relationships. Most dangerously, the comparison trap prevents women from making strategic decisions based on their actual circumstances and goals, instead driving decisions based on keeping up with perceived peer achievements that may not be accurately understood or personally relevant. Many women in their 30s operate under the false belief that opportunities are becoming scarce and that immediate action is required to avoid missing out on their last chances for success in relationships, career, or personal fulfillment. The scarcity delusion operates through misunderstanding how opportunities actually work in adult life. Rather than opportunities becoming scarcer with age, they often become more accessible as people develop skills, resources, and clearer self-knowledge that makes them better able to recognize and pursue suitable opportunities. This delusion particularly affects relationship thinking, where women believe that their 30s represent their last opportunity for quality partners, when the reality is that people continue forming successful relationships throughout their lives, and older relationship formation often produces better outcomes due to increased maturity and self-awareness. The scarcity mindset creates desperation that makes poor decisions seem necessary, and reasonable options seem too risky or slow. Women accept lower quality partners or opportunities because they fear that waiting for better options means missing their window entirely. Career scarcity delusion makes women feel like they must achieve certain professional milestones immediately, or lose their chance forever, when most careers allow for multiple phases of development and growth that can happen at different life stages. The delusion also affects personal development and goal achievement by creating artificial deadlines that don't actually exist, leading to rushed efforts that produce inferior results compared to more patient, strategic approaches. Understanding that opportunities often expand rather than contract with age can reduce the urgency that drives poor decision-making and allow for more strategic, sustainable approaches to goal achievement. Women who feel they've wasted their 20s often believe they can recover lost time by accelerating their 30s, but this recovery fantasy usually produces additional lost time through poor decisions driven by urgency. The recovery fantasy operates through the belief that past mistakes can be compensated for through future intensity rather than accepting that past time is gone, and present time should be invested wisely regardless of previous choices. This fantasy makes women feel justified in demanding accelerated timelines from partners, employers, and life circumstances because they need to catch up to where they feel they should be, creating entitled attitudes that often sabotage the very goals they're trying to achieve. Sunk cost recovery thinking also prevents women from accepting their current reality and making optimal choices going forward. Instead of starting from where they are with realistic expectations, they start from where they wish they were with compressed timelines that rarely work. The fantasy extends to relationship decisions where women try to recover lost relationship time by rushing current relationships, often repeating the same poor decision-making patterns that created lost time in the first place. Recovery fantasy thinking also affects career and personal development by creating pressure to achieve everything immediately, rather than building sustainable progress over appropriate time periods. The most destructive aspect of sunk cost recovery is that it often creates additional sunk costs through poor decisions driven by urgency, making the original problem worse rather than better. Every major life domain involves trade-offs between speed of achievement and quality of outcomes, but women operating under timeline pressure often sacrifice quality for speed in ways that ultimately slow down their progress toward meaningful goals. The trade-off dynamic operates through understanding that most worthwhile achievements require time for skill development, relationship building, and iterative improvement that cannot be compressed without compromising the final result. In relationships, prioritizing speed over quality leads to partnerships based on availability rather than compatibility, often resulting in relationships that don't last or don't provide the fulfillment that justified the urgency in the first place. Career development speed versus quality trade-offs involve choosing rapid advancement opportunities that don't build solid foundations versus slower development that creates sustainable expertise and long-term success. Personal development rushed for speed often produces surface-level changes that don't hold up under pressure, rather than deep changes that become permanent parts of personality and behaviour patterns. The trade-off also affects health and fitness goals, where rapid changes through extreme measures typically produce temporary results that reverse quickly, while slower changes through sustainable methods produce lasting improvements. Understanding these trade-offs allows women to make conscious decisions about when speed might be worth sacrificing quality, and when quality should be prioritised over speed, rather than defaulting to speed in all domains due to timeline anxiety. Understanding late-start reality requires recognising that most people don't optimise their 20s for long-term success, creating situations where serious life building often begins later than ideal cultural timelines suggest. The validation framework acknowledges that feeling behind schedule is common for people who spent their 20s learning through experience rather than following optimal strategic plans they didn't have the wisdom to create or implement effectively. This framework includes accepting that late starts require the same time investments as early starts, but with compressed timelines that create urgency without changing the actual requirements for competence development and sustainable progress. Personal experience shows that career development, relationship building, and personal growth work take approximately the same amount of time, regardless of starting age, making age-based urgency counterproductive for achievement in any domain. The framework also includes understanding that regret about past choices is less productive than accepting current reality and making optimal choices going forward based on actual circumstances rather than ideal circumstances. Validation through personal experience demonstrates that sustainable success requires giving yourself adequate time for skill development and competence building rather than expecting accelerated results to compensate for late starts. The framework prevents the entitled attitude that life should accommodate abbreviated timelines by recognizing that competence and experience requirements remain consistent regardless of personal timelines or urgency levels. Improving outcomes requires making better strategic choices about goal sequencing, timeline expectations, and resource allocation rather than expecting external circumstances to accommodate unrealistic demands and impossible schedules. The implementation strategy begins with accepting that meaningful life achievements require time investments that cannot be compressed without compromising quality and sustainability of results. Better choices include selecting one primary life domain for intensive development while maintaining stability in other domains, rather than attempting simultaneous improvement across all areas of life. The strategy involves adjusting expectations to realistic timelines based on the complexity of desired outcomes, rather than demanding abbreviated timelines based on personal urgency or late-start anxiety. Implementation also requires developing patience for sustainable progress, rather than demanding immediate results that typically produce unsustainable changes and eventual failure. Better choices extend to partner selection through allowing adequate time for proper compatibility evaluation, rather than rushing commitment decisions due to timeline pressure and urgency. The strategy framework includes accepting that sequential achievement over extended periods produces better long-term outcomes than parallel achievement over compressed periods that typically results in surface-level progress and underlying instability. Understanding the harsh reality of a modern woman's expectations isn't about being cruel or unsympathetic. It's about recognizing that unrealistic expectations and impossible timelines create predictable failures while preventing the strategic thinking necessary for actual success. The women who succeed in their 30s are typically those who accept realistic timelines, focus sequentially on important goals, and make strategic choices about resource allocation, rather than demanding that life accommodate their urgency. Real achievement requires understanding that meaningful success takes time, focused attention, and strategic patience rather than entitled demands for immediate results across multiple life domains simultaneously. If this analysis has helped you recognize unrealistic expectations in your own goal setting and relationship approaches, subscribe to this channel for more insights into strategic thinking about life achievement and relationship success. Share this video with any woman who might benefit from understanding why rushing typically produces the opposite of desired outcomes. Remember that understanding these patterns allows you to make better strategic choices that actually produce the life results you want rather than the frustrating cycles that unrealistic expectations typically create.